So Dresden became a new phase after the war. You can see it on the right, some examples in a mostly modern and socialist shape. Next slide, please. Luckily, this would change from the 1970s on, as there was a change of paradigm in the regime's way of thinking. I will keep that short for now, but feel free to ask afterwards about this. So there was a change of paradigm, and restoration now increasingly replaced destruction. So the regime even started rebuilding some of the important landmarks that were still in ruins. For example, the Semper Opera House, which you can see on the right, was reconstructed in 1985. And this is very important for our story here. Next slide, please, because it also brought changes to the Neumarkt, the heart of the city, which was still completely empty. Next, please. So we are in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s now, where city planners thought of redeveloping this heart of the city, this former historic old town. You see these new plans and new designs that were made. They hardly included any historic reconstruction, but still, this was a very important process to start, because it was an important basis for the later rebuilding to have this Neumarkt or new market to be rethought again as a urban and crowded city center. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one, right. After 1990, you might know that Germany became reunified again, so Dresden became part of the Western Germany again, as the German Democratic Republic broke down. And this would bring big changes also, not only for the whole country, but also for the city in particular. If you walked through Dresden in 1990, the wounds from the war, they were still openly visible everywhere. So you had ruins everywhere, you had open spaces everywhere, and people were hoping for change, that now with the change in politics, something could also change in the city and a healing process of the wounds could take place. Shortly after this reunification, a very important event was happening. So some important citizens came together and they wrote something like an open letter to the world, to the public, which was called Ruf aus Dresden, or in English, Call from Dresden, where they stated, we want the most important and famous building of the city, the Frauenkirche. We want this building to be reconstructed in its completely historic original shape. And this would become a very important starting point for the later dynamic. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. Actually, this desire became reality in 1993, where they started to reconstruct the church. You can see the picture on the left. And on the right, you have the result 12 years later in 2005, where this beautiful Baroque church was reconsecrated. Next, please. Here you have an impression from the inside. I think it came out really stunning and luminous, and it gave Dresden a lot more back than just a church. So today it's a symbol of healing, of forgiving, a symbol of peace, and I would say it's simply the most important building for the city. Next, please. But if we have a look again at this picture from the mid-90s, now you have the reconstruction of the church, but still the square around it, the complete former historic old town, it was completely empty. And the question arose, what do we do with the rest of it? Next, please. And this socialist idea of creating something completely modernist and new, this idea was still very alive in some minds of the architects and decision makers at the time. So some of them still dreamed of a very radical modernist center and already started realizing and planning that. So next picture, please. Some really disappointing drafts were made at the time, and next, please, already were in construction. And this was the moment at the end of the 90s where the citizens from Dresden, who wanted something else, who wanted their former historic old town back, their identity back, they came together and, next please, they formed our association, the Dresden Historic Society, in 1999, which would bring big changes to the city. Next, please, brings us to the next chapter, where we have a look at the last 20-25 years. So our association, they started raising awareness for this historic chance that we had in Dresden at the time. They said, we have this historic one-time chance that the former historic Old Town today is still a completely empty place, and we have the chance to bring this back and to give Dresden its identity, which had grown over centuries, for generations, to bring this identity back to the city. So they started mobilizing the citizens for this idea. They started convincing architects, politicians, investors as well, with old pictures, with historic plans, like you see it on the right, as well as professional advice. Next one, please. And 3 years later, in 2002, our association organized a municipal referendum. This is a special form of citizen participation in Germany. Like, if you collect enough signatures from the citizens, then you have the right to ask a question to the people, like, do you want this or that? And if the majority votes yes, then the municipal government is obliged to actually do so. And this is actually what happened. So the result was overwhelming. Over 60,000 citizens and in total more than 80,000 people signed for a rebuilt Neumarkt in its historical shape. So really the people from Dresden said, we want this reconstruction process of the historic Old Town to be realized, and this would become a tipping point for this story. Next one, please. So in the years after, really street for street and quarter for quarter, the city became, the historic Old Town became reconstructed again. So now you might think, okay, you had the people on your side and you started reconstructing everything, so the rest was easy, right? But this is definitely not the case. If we go to the next slide, and please show all the pictures just there. Yeah, thank you. So this idea of the radical modernist center, it was still alive, and every now and then, architects and city planners tried to undermine this historic vision and try to push through some of these works that you see here. Some of them were really, really close to construction, and it was a very hard fight over years for our association to keep going for the historic vision and to defend it and to prevent these most radical modernist drafts that you see here. Next one, please. And luckily, our association was successful with that for the most part. So if you walk through the historic Old Town today, it mostly looks like this, like over more than 100 historic buildings were or became reconstructed at their exact same position where they had been before. Next one, please. And to give you an impression of what this looks like today, I have again these perspectives. Next slide, please. And this is what they look like today. So this is one example, one perspective that Dresden is especially famous for. Next slide, please. This is the historic Judenhof. Next slide. Yeah, also another beautiful perspective of the Church of Our Lady. And next one, please. Here you have a good overview what the Neumarkt, the historic center, looks like today and what it looked like before on the left. So I think the result is really, really stunning. You really have the historic street pattern and the historic architecture back for the most part. And yeah, I think this is an absolutely beautiful thing to happen. Next one, please. Which brings me to the last chapter, and I will keep this really short. What are we still working on today? So the historic Neumarkt is actually complete. Except for one building, which you can see on the top right picture. We try our best to also make this realized during the next couple of years. And at the same time, we have a new project going on. We cross the river Elbe and go from the historic Old Town to the historic New Town. And there's a place called the Neustädter Markt, which is kind of similar to the Neumarkt 20 years ago. Because there you still have lots of empty spaces and a big street in between, and you have lots of chances left to bring back what was there before. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah, thank you. So our vision is to turn this place, what it looks like today with lots of cars and empty spaces, into the right picture and to reconstruct also the Baroque buildings and facades that had been there before. And next, please. Our work for the next years will be to have a beautiful urban historic square on both sides of the river again, and to continue, as we are part of many city development discussions going on in the city, to continue the story of this rebuilding process, because it really makes a difference and it really is possible. Next one, please. And to conclude this, I just want to show you 3 more pictures of the historic center of Dresden. The first picture, obviously, is before 1945. This is what the historic square really looked like. The second picture is after destruction, where you can see the ruins of the church, and I really like this picture. You can see sheep eating grass on the ground in the middle of the city. I think this is pretty insane. And if we go to the next slide, this is what the place looks like today with the reconstructed with the reconstructed church in the center, with the beautiful buildings around it. I think it turned out amazing. People love it. They can identify with it. We have lots of visitors and tourists in Dresden every year. It brought Dresden very much a lot of things back, not only beauty and architecture, but I think the overall positive development that the city is taking now has also to do with this reconstructing process, because the city was given just its heart and its soul back. And I think this is really, really beautiful and can be serving as a role model also for other cities, hopefully. So for the moment, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you liked this little story about the rebuilding of Dresden. And yeah, if you want, stay in touch with us, follow our socials, visit our website, and follow our ongoing work for the rebuilding process of Dresden. And now I'm really looking forward to your questions and remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was fascinating and very moving, Leon. Could I do a quick audience poll? Hands up for how many people here have been to Dresden? That's pretty good.
That's great.
That's not bad.
A lot of people.
Well, I hope it will be higher soon. It's an intensely romantic and fascinating city. Quick question from me to start us. What's been the effect of the reconstruction in Dresden elsewhere in Germany? How much emulation has there been, or might there be in the future?
I think it caused some developments going on also in other cities. Like, for example, we have the reconstruction of the historic city palace in Berlin, which was a pretty big thing to happen. Close to Berlin, we have the city of Potsdam, where kind of the similar thing is happening right now. So you have a reconstruction of a church, of a whole historic city center. And you have also other cities like, for example, Frankfurt, where similar things were going on during the last years and also will go on in the future. So I think this really caused a dynamic that is not only working in Dresden, but also in other cities and hopefully also in other countries. Yeah.
Questions from the audience? Lady here, please. On row 4.
Yeah. It's not working. No. I try to hear you, yeah. Sorry?
How do young people, how does the youth react to that? So do they also feel that this is our identity, this is something we can connect, also given that in the Neustadt, so the new part of the town, there are a lot of youth initiatives, alternative art and the like. So how do they connect to this restoration?
No, thank you. That's a really good question. Of course, this debate is highly controversial, not only in Dresden, also in other cities, because there are other people saying like it's revisionist or something like that. I think that we are talking a lot with the people in Dresden, obviously, and I would say that 8 or 9 out of 10 people, they really like that, and we hear very often that people are really thankful that this was made possible, because something, like I said, the heart, or really something very important, was missing since the war, and now people have it back. So I think that the overall impression the people have of this is very positive. And you asked about the young people. My personal impression, honestly, is that younger people have very often have a even stronger connection, or are more like open to this kind of architecture, or identify more with it than the generation before. This is my very personal impression, that the generation before, who grew up with like 60s, 70s architecture, they have maybe a stronger bond to that, and that is fine, because apart from that, Dresden still is a very modernist place in many other places. But I have the impression that especially the young people really identify with that, because you have to see that they are growing up with that. For the older people, this might be something completely new now, but the younger people, they don't know the city anymore like it was before. So they are growing up with this historical center, and they think like it has been there everywhere. And for me, it's especially funny to see when, for example, visitors come to Dresden and they say something like, well, it hasn't been disrupted that much because look, it's all here, so it's great. So this is a very funny and beautiful thing to happen, I think. So yeah, to answer that, I think the people really, for the most part, really love it, I guess, yeah. The historic Old Town is a mixture of everything. So you have buildings that are reconstructed completely, also on the inside. You also have many buildings that are, you have the reconstructed facades, but on the inside you have modern shapes and modern apartments. And then you also have in between modern buildings, but in an adapted style, so that they really fit into the rest. So in the overall shape, I think, or the overall impression of the Old Town is very harmonic, and I think it is a very good mix of past and present, heritage and architecture. And sorry, the second question was.
Do you think the same approach could be adopted in the UK? The UK took a very different, after the Second World War, rebuild much. Coventry is there wasn't much to say salvage or rebuild Coventry. Does Dresden show it's never too late to actually adopt that approach?
I think so, because even in Dresden, many time was passed by until this started. So because you had the war, the destruction, and afterwards you had 40, 50 years of socialist regime, which was something completely different at first. So it took 50, 60, 70 years to get this started. So I think this is also for Coventry and other cities, this is never too late to happen. Dresden especially had the luck, like I explained, that the historic area was still empty. And in many other cities, also in Western German cities where the economic situation was better, they built this over. So you don't have this space anymore because no building was torn down for this. This was all from the ground, built up. And this is the difference maybe in cities where you have a complete dense new center today. It's obviously more difficult, but this is also possible. So in other German cities like Frankfurt or Potsdam, you had modern constructions before at the same place, but after they were built up like in the 70s, but after 30, 40 years they have to be turned down because materials are not very sustainable, and they live their life and they are over and they had to be torn down. And I think these chances you have in every city every now and then when changes are coming, and then you have over and over again the chance to create something better. So I really think that this is possible also in other cities, yeah.
Hi, that's really, really interesting and great job has been done. I'm just trying to work out the process. So was the whole of that area in public ownership as a result of what had happened?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, was the whole of the area that's now being redeveloped, was that in public ownership rather than split into private plots?
Yeah. It was mostly in public ownership. This is due to the socialist past, because they were like in the late 40s and beginning 50s, they were taking away all the private ownerships, and so for the most part this belonged to the city, but you had some private parcels where you had to find the owners and to talk to them, and I think it was very crucial to get in touch with these people and to get in touch as well with the investors and say, hey, we have an idea for this place maybe, and we can help you with that. So part of our association are many architects, art historians and so on. So we went to them and said, hey, look, we have a plan how this could be working. The additional costs are like not that much as you might think, and many investors, luckily, they said, yeah, this is a really great project, this is a great idea, we want to do it. And also the ownership was no major problem, I guess, because mostly public and some of them private, which you could talk to, yeah.
Thank you. Is it on now?
Yeah.
Like everyone else, I'd say congratulations. It's fantastic. Dresden had a very specific history of its destruction, and therefore it's completely appropriate to rebuild the old buildings and keep the look of it. I have a slightly different view. In Frankfurt, which was not the same as Dresden, I'm not saying it was, but in the Roma district, for instance, they've reconstructed all the old buildings correctly or perfectly. I don't know the detail, but it looks very convincing to all the tourists, of course, and to other people. And then alongside, they've also done modern developments of what I understand are mostly apartment blocks, sort of 6-story buildings that are respectful to the original buildings. They're very modern. They're not some of the ones that you showed here. Is there a case, perhaps not in the centre of Dresden, because it's got this very specific history, but isn't there a case for also developing modern architecture that is respectful, that is carries the spirit, if not the actual design, of what Dresden used to be? Like the Neumarkt. Could the Neumarkt be perhaps rebuilt with perhaps the land plan that it had, but with different buildings? Anyway, that's one question. I have one other smaller question, if you have time, but not if you don't. You said that in the 1970s there was a paradigm change in consciousness. What was that? What brought it about, and why did it happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. I will go with the second question first. So, when the German Democratic Republic was founded, they, like I said, wanted to create a completely new state with a new identity, a socialist identity. So they didn't want the people to feel like German anymore, and they tried to. They try to demolish not only the buildings but also the national feeling or identity from the people. And this would change because you had a strong competition going on between East and West, between socialism and capitalism, and from the 70s on, you also had a change in government, by the way, and they started to identify more as German, so the cultural heritage of Germany became interesting to them, and they wanted to be as part of this systemical competition. They wanted to be the real Germany of the two Germanys. They wanted to be the better version of Germany, and this was part of this competition. So, for example, famous Germans like Martin Luther, for example, who lived in the eastern part, like many centuries ago. He was not interesting before for the regime, but now he was used for the propaganda. So this was a change in the way of thinking of the regime, a change in propaganda, that they were like identifying as German or more as German now than before. And this brought the big change also for the cities, of course. And yeah, buildings like the Hofkirche or the Semper Opera House, which had been in ruins since then, they now were saved and rebuilt. Yeah. And sorry, I think the first question was about the modern architecture. Yeah, so Dresden, like I said, it's still today, you get a wrong impression here because it's still a very modernist city in large parts. And I think there are good examples of modernism. I can't show you now in this presentation, unfortunately, but there are good examples that also try to adapt the historical identity in some case. But I also have to say that large parts of the socialist housing and like skyscrapers and socialist architecture, for me, seems like a hard cut in the city's development. So honestly, I hope there will be further changes in the future, because this rebuilding process and restoration process of the city still is not over. It's still going on. And but of course, every time and every style has its place in the city's history and is also represented in the cityscape. Yeah.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I can see a lot more hands, but I'm sure Leon will be happy to discuss later. If you could just join me in thanking him for a fascinating presentation.